There is something seriously broken in F125 MyTeam, and it needs to be fixed sooner rather than later. Now I'm talking about R&D. In F125, they've completely reworked how your team develops a car, how regulation changes work, and possibly how the AI teams operate in general. I would assume these changes were brought in to improve the realism and immersion of the game, but what we've ended up with feels half-baked and completely unbalanced. AI teams will constantly max out their cars within a season or two, regulation changes don't affect the full department anymore, and championship results stay static unless there are major driver changes. So in this video, I'll be trying to break down exactly what's wrong with F125's new MyTeam R&D, the problems it's causing, and why EA needs to fix this urgently. Now before we get into the bulk of this video, I must admit F125 has been a great game so far. I'm going to be very nitpicky with some of these issues, and for the majority of people it won't have much of an effect, but for someone like me and other content creators, it might have some serious effects on how our content goes. Let's start with the biggest change to this year's game. Now it's not necessarily an issue, but the new R&D system. Now in F125, EA has overhauled how you upgrade your car. In previous games, and still in Driver Career, it was pretty simple. You would earn resource points, buy an upgrade, wait for it to be delivered, and it automatically gets put on your car. Now there is a chance that upgrade might fail, but you can just retry. Now it may have been simple, but it was clear and effective. But in this new game, they would take inspiration from the F1 Manager series and split the process into its individual stages, research and development. First of all, you will need to use resource points collected from practice sessions and other activities to research the part you want. Now I'm pretty sure this stage can no longer fail, and it will just be delayed, but will continue researching without you needing to resume it. Now once that part has been complete, you will now have to spend cash to develop that part before you can actually use it on track. Now on paper, this does sound pretty good. It's more realistic and matches more closely to how it works for real F1 teams. However, it can be quite restrictive, especially at lower facility levels. Previous games, when you would start at lower levels, you would only be able to develop one part at a time per department, and it would go on both cars. But now you will have to develop parts for both cars and prioritise who gets upgrades first. Now it does make the game feel more realistic, but right now isn't too big of an issue. One of the biggest issues I've found is the way regulation changes now work. Now in past games, they would be absolutely game changing. You would receive a warning that a full department or departments, those being aerodynamics, powertrain, chassis or durability, would be hit by these changes. You would then have to take your resource points and adapt these upgrades, or you would lose them and have to redo them next season. This system added necessary depth, strategy and suspense season after season. Questions around saving resource points for the regulation changes were created. Do you upgrade your car as much as possible this season and start from scratch next year, or forget about the current season and go full steam ahead into the next? Now in F125, it just isn't the same. The regulation changes target individual upgrades rather than the entire department, which creates the new scenario where not adapting parts will only see you losing maybe 4 or 5 upgrades compared to losing almost 24 upgrades in previous iterations of the game. With these limited changes, all teams can easily adapt everything with minimal effort, leaving barely noticeable differences between one season and the next. To see an example of how the old system would shake things up, we can have a look at one of the last F124 videos I made, where I added Peugeot into my team and simulated 10 seasons. More specifically, I want to look at Season 6 and 7. Up until Season 6, there were no major regulation changes. However, at the end of that season, all performance departments were hit, meaning you would need a lot of resource points to save your car's development. Season 6 saw Ferrari win the Constructors' Championship, with Max Verstappen taking the driver's title. But after the regulation changes, Ferrari dropped down to P6, with Verstappen also dropping down to P5. Smaller teams such as the VCARB and the Williams teams were able to adapt stronger than any other teams to see them both catapult to the top of the standings, with both VCARB drivers finishing in the top 3 and both Williams drivers in the top 6. Comparing that to the base 10-year simulation on F125 and once again Season 6 and 7. Season 6 would see McLaren and Kimi Antonelli win both the titles before all performance departments are hit with regulation changes. But unlike F124, both championship winners would retain their title, actually having much larger point gaps to second place. Interestingly, there was only 2 teams to change position in the Constructors, as Red Bull and Mercedes will swap places, really highlighting the lack of excitement and unpredictability being created by these new regulation changes. And another thing that these regulation changes are almost hidden. If you have automatic development turned on, which I do for simulation videos, you can't even tell that they are coming, unless you manually go into the research and development tabs. But for most players that use manual development, that won't be as big of an issue. But for someone like me, who relies on knowing that those regulation changes are coming into effect, and using them to highlight the drama of the simulations, it can really hinder my videos. But moving on to one of the biggest issues I have found, the AI team development is just completely broken. This year, it seems that the AI team have no barriers when it comes to upgrading their cars. It doesn't seem like they run out of resource points or cash, even when using the reduced settings for both. From my experience, when you start with the slowest car possible, it can take almost 4 seasons to get a fully maxed out car. But when you compare it to the top teams like Red Bull, Ferrari and McLaren, they seem to be able to do it in 1 or 2. So this just means that you are just stuck at the back of the grid for the first few seasons, and unless there are some major regulation changes, which as we've discussed don't really have much of an effect, you are stuck there until you can upgrade your car to the max. This year also doesn't allow for the smaller teams to have any chance of fighting up at the top. And to see this, we'll look at both simulations I've uploaded this year. Now, ignoring the added team of Cupra in that second video, only Red Bull, Ferrari and McLaren have won titles, with the only Drivers' Championship winners driving for one of those teams when they won it. In fact, the Drivers' Champion won at Red Bull 4 times, Ferrari 5 times, and McLaren 9 times, with no other team other than Mercedes having their driver in the top 3. This once again highlights just how broken the AI teams are. The top teams will stay at the top, the same drivers continue to win, and the grid stays almost the same unless there are significant driver transfers, in which any driver moving to Red Bull, Ferrari or McLaren will probably still be at the top no matter how good they are. Now, another example of this is the newest simulation I have started. Now, I've simulated the first 3 seasons, and I'm probably going to have to scrap it because the results are just not what I want them to be. Red Bull have finished at the top of the Constructors' Championship with no team really getting close for 3 years in a row, which is understandable. They did win a few years in a row, but the Drivers' Championship is really where you see this come into effect. The simulation so far has seen Max Verstappen win the title for 3 years in a row, Leclerc finishing as the runner-up for 3 years in a row, and George Russell finishing in 3rd place for 3 years in a row. Now, I really want to say that was a joke, but it's completely true. That's how the simulation has started. Even with all teams having reduced resource points and cash, and even with some regulation changes coming into effect, absolutely nothing at the top changes. And who really wants to see the top 3 of the standings finish the same for 3 years in a row? So that video is probably going to be scrapped and have to restart. Now, another thing I want to quickly mention is the introduction of the cost cap. Now, I've simulated across 23 different seasons, and not once have I seen a team breach the cost cap. Now, I know it's not very common for teams to do it, so I'm not expecting it to happen every year, but I would expect by now at least one team would have done it at least once. Now, overall, the new R&D system is pretty good. It does mimic real life a lot more than previous games, and it's not necessarily the main issue here. The development speeds of the AI team are. It makes the game so much more frustrating to play. Now, getting stuck at the back of the grid or in the midfield year after year isn't far off realism, but this game isn't a realistic simulator. It's more of a hybrid between simulator and arcade style, meaning everything needs to be usable and enjoyable for both parties. If EA can fix the AI development speed, possibly revert to how regulation changes worked in F124, MyTeam could really excel, and would make for much more entertaining storylines and results, especially for those on console who cannot mod the game however they like. Well, the rest of this game is really positive, and I've really enjoyed this new addition to the franchise, but I just can't get over some of these issues. Well, the first patch being 1.03 has been released today, and as of writing and recording, but does not address any of the issues I have mentioned. So hopefully someone from EA could see this, sees other people saying the same thing, and something can eventually be done about it sooner rather than later. But anyway, I think that's enough of me ranting on about car development in this game. Let me know your thoughts on the topic down below, and don't forget to subscribe while you are there. But that is going to be all from me today, so I hope you have a good day, evening or night, wherever you are, and goodbye.